Hello retro gamers and welcome to a new repair series. The origins of this GameCube and N64 is a little bit bizarre. When I was on holidays a few weeks ago, I got a message from one of my co-workers who was working nearby where I live, and he found these two consoles sitting in the grass. The thing is, it's been quite wet over here for the last month or so. I think there was something ridiculous like 18 days of consecutive rain, which is definitely a good way to make a West Australian miserable. Regardless, he pulled these out of the wet grass after pouring a bunch of water out of both, and I came down to the vacant lot and picked them up. Now I've recorded a tremendous amount of footage for these two consoles, so we'll be splitting it into two parts. Today, we're going to take a look at this N64. Obviously, I'm not going to turn it on as it's just been pulled out of a wet lot, but we'll strip it down, give it a good clean, and we'll see if it boots up. As you can see, it is a bit worse for wear. Apart from being soaking wet, there is a massive hole in the side. Not only is this damage aesthetically unpleasing, it also means that more moisture could have made its way inside. The lid for the memory expansion is also missing, but that's no worry, I have a spare one of those. Installed is a jumper pack, not an expansion pack, unfortunately. Jumper packs actually don't serve any purpose at all, besides from terminating the pins where the expansion pack is supposed to go. So it does need to be installed. If it is removed, the N64 will not turn on. Interesting how it has this sticker over there saying not to remove it, kind of like a warranty sticker. I'm not really sure what the deal is there. Presumably you would want to install an expansion pack, but I digress. Either way, we'll need to get rid of that. Please, don't tell Nintendo. And with the aid of a flat-headed screwdriver, we can also remove the jumper pack. From there, we'll need to remove 5 game bit screws. For this, you'll need a special screwdriver bit. This one was holding in more than I'm sure it bargained for. Now, we can do the first reveal. First impressions? Honestly, not as disgusting as I would have thought, although this spider wasn't happy that I was dismantling its home. And also, next to this leaf, I found something small and squishy. Ugh, gross, that can come right out. So as we can see, the metal parts do look a little bit worse for wear, but we won't know the full extent of any damage until we get rid of this heatsink. This is held in by seemingly a million screws, so let's get rid of those. Whoops, missed one. Double whoops, actually missed 3. The deeper we go, the grosser the metal gets. Should've worn gloves. After a few more screws, this piece of metal can come out, and honestly, the board is actually looking pretty good. The heatsink clamps down pretty tightly, so I think it may have actually protected the circuit board. Alright, let's lift the innards out and remove the bottom shielding as our spider bro says its final goodbyes. The bottom doesn't look that bad either, although I did find some water, which is always concerning. Main point of concern is this switch. It looks pretty worse for wear and it doesn't toggle very well. Either way, here is everything fully disassembled, including the GameCube, which you'll see in a future video. Note I did this outside. I wouldn't usually do that, but things got pretty gross. Regardless, let's start cleaning. Well, not before I brush all the crap out of the case. Okay, let's start cleaning. First off, I'm going to give this a heavy washover with distilled white vinegar, which is very good for corrosion, arguably better than IPA. And since this has more or less been sitting in water, I would assume there is quite a bit of corrosion, more than probably what the human eye can see. I wasn't holding back either. The idea is that I would go a little bit over the top and then give it a very long time to dry. Special attention was given to the switch as well, as it looked like it really copped it. And then I did the exact same thing with isopropyl alcohol. This should clear up just about everything else. By the time I'm done with it, this board should be well and truly sterilized. Okay, after giving it a good 24 hours to dry, I thought it was time for its first test. So now we can finally answer. Will it boot up? We have a light. Turns on. And it does. That is amazing. Of course, we're not going to see anything because the jumper pack is not installed, so let's remedy that. Oh my god. Do we get sound? As you can probably tell, I'm absolutely gobsmacked that this thing turns on. I didn't even do any real repairs, I just cleaned it. That, my friends, is the face of sweet, sweet, quiet satisfaction. So now, let's plug in our controller, reset the system, and just make sure that everything works as fine as we think it does. Fortunately, everything seems to be working fine. But unfortunately, that doesn't help my cause when it comes to playing this game. Yeah, no, I'm pretty bad at this. Why don't we transfer to my personal favourite game on the N64, and that is none other than Wave Race. Yeah, that's the ticket. Alright, now that the hardware is working, let's turn our attention to the case situation. As a quick aside, I also gave the jumper pack it came with a quick clean, and even though I forgot to film it, it did appear to work, so that's good, I guess. Now, I actually own another broken N64, which has a case that is in marginally better condition, so I thought I could mix and match the case parts. The story of this N64 is a little bit sad. I bought this a few years ago, and even though it boots up, any game you try to play on it will freeze after a couple of minutes. I did quite a bit of troubleshooting, but it appears the issue might be the RAM, which of course I can't fix. Also, bizarrely, someone had smeared thermal paste all over the mainboard in a hope to cool it down more, I guess. Regardless, this was really messy. I think it had been sitting in there for quite a long time. I got it all over my desk, all over my hands, and all over my work mat, which actually resulted in me buying a new one. Anyway, the case doesn't have a massive hole out of the side, all the broken bits are on the inside, so I think there's probably a hope I can repair that. So I pulled apart this N64 for the last time, and annoyingly still got some thermal paste on my fingers. This stuff is everywhere, and you would not believe how much I washed this thing. So that prompted me to regret pulling this thing apart again, and with that, it went into quarantine. So that can go back into the bin of stuff that I wasn't able to fix or just haven't fixed. Let's take a closer look at that case. The most obvious defect is of course this big chunk that is missing, but I'm glad I still have said chunk, as I'm confident I can glue it back into place. And while I also have the piece to glue this screw post back together, the 3 screw posts at the back will need to be rebuilt using my 3D printer. Additionally, there is a bit of plastic missing that holds in half of the cartridge flap, as well as this gaping hole in the grill. Let's start by re-gluing the pieces we do have. I like to use All Plastic Fix by Sellies. This stuff works really well. Almost too well. Try not to get it on your fingers. It comes in 2 parts. On the left, there is a little primer brush, and on the right, we have the glue itself. The primer gets applied to both surfaces getting glued, and then you just use the actual glue bit on one of the sides before sticking it together and holding it in place for about 30 seconds. And yeah, that kind of sounded like an infomercial. Guess I should probably add that I'm not sponsored by Sellies, because this is not the last Sellies product you'll see in this video, but I would like to point out that if for some reason someone from Sellies is watching, how unlikely that is, I would love to be sponsored. Hook a bro up. And after the big piece, I then reunited the screw post. Easily done. Now for the fun bit, redesigning the screw posts so they can be 3D printed. This starts by measuring the actual screw itself. We'll need to know things like its width, but also aspects like how far apart the threads are. And of course we need to measure the diameter of the screw posts themselves. Luckily, these were all intact in the original case, so I could use these as a reference while designing new ones. Using Tinkercad for the modelling, there is a very useful shape generator called an isometric thread. There is a list of variables that can be set, and based off my measurements before, I can hopefully create something that will work. It was great using the printer again, as I don't think I've used it at all since I printed those handheld stands from a few videos back. Regardless, it did take a little bit of trial and error. See, the thing is, the plastic expands as it prints, so the hole gets smaller. Luckily, these only took about 5 minutes each to print, and after gradually changing the variables, I got something that screwed. Yes, very satisfying. Am I a real engineer yet? Can I drive a train? For those looking to create this yourself, here are the winning variables I used. Let's take a quick look at this cartridge slot. This screw post has also snapped off. Guess we better glue that back too. Okay, with that drying, let's look into how we can make these other posts suitable for repair. They all seem to have broken off on a slant, so we'll need to file them down and make them flush. Here's a fun little toolkit I bought just for this project. This task was a little slow going and pretty boring if I'm being honest, but it was a good chance to listen to some new music and maybe a few podcasts. And while I probably should have used my Dremel, I thought it was better to go slow but a bit more precisely, because the plastic was ultimately quite soft, so it wasn't really that much of a challenge. These all look ready for printing, but there is quite a bit of ABS dust around and the top of the case isn't that clean anyway, so let's give it a bit of a rub-a-dub-dub. As per usual, this is nothing special. I just treat it like a dirty plate really. All you need is warm soapy water. I think I overdid it with the bubbles though. And now with that nice and sparkly, we can get on with designing the specific posts we need. Using the templates I created in Tinkercad before, I measured the original case, figuring out exactly how long I needed to print the posts to make them whole again. I also attempted to recreate the wings, with the hope that these would be as stable as they were the day they came out of the factory. I can't say how happy I am to be using my 3D printer again. Looks pretty good if I say so myself. Let's do a quick test fit. As you can see, it fits onto the existing plastic quite easily. And importantly, it's the right height. As you can see here, it is flush. For a comparison, this is what it should look like. Alright, all 3 screw posts are designed and printing. While that's going on, let's get some other work done. Apart from the screw posts, I also needed to direct my attention towards the bit of plastic that was holding in the cartridge flap. As you can see, this is a bit more of a difficult thing to design and print. I gave it a couple of goes, but ultimately wasn't really able to come up with something that worked. But in a stroke of luck, I hadn't actually screwed in the cartridge attachment yet, and I found with that installed, it actually holds the flap in place, so I don't actually need to recreate that bit of plastic. So that's a win. As you can see, it now works exactly as intended. Alright, those screw posts are now printed. Let's glue them into place. And this time, I'm wearing gloves, because last time I got glue all over my fingers like a complete idiot. So here's the first and longest screw post glued in. Let's do the other 2. I gave these a night to dry, and then very eagerly tested them the next day. Out of the 3, only the middle one worked as intended. You see, with the longest one, the bottom of the case isn't flat, so this was actually glued at a bit of an angle. Since there is so much glue holding it in place though, I can actually wiggle it around slightly with my finger. So I think I'll use that to my advantage. The one on the right, on the other hand, while lined up perfectly, wasn't actually being screwed into anything. And on further investigation, that appears to be because there is a bit of plastic missing out of the bottom piece of the case, which I didn't notice before. On the right is what it should look like, while on the left the hole is too big, so there's nothing for the screw to latch onto. Meanwhile, in an unrelated plot line, a storm was coming in and it was getting very spicy outside. But never mind that for now, back to the repair. The first thing I did was design a piece to repair the hole in that bottom case. This was a very simple shape. It was just a cylinder with a hole in the middle. And here's that piece printed. Let's glue it into place. Let's take a second to look at this grill. Originally, I had intended on recreating the wavy bits that go in there, but this kind of just felt a little bit too hard. In retrospect, I probably should have given it a crack, but not only is the grill itself on an angle, but the segments are also curved, making it a pretty complex shape. So instead, I decided to go with a custom approach. I wanted to plug the hole, so I thought why not put the RGO logo there? Hell, when am I ever going to get a chance to do that again? Before printing the actual logo itself, I printed a few different templates. With a bit of trial and error and a little bit of sanding, I finally figured out a way to fit that curve properly. And no, there wasn't really any complex measuring and curvature calculations going on or anything like that. I really just winged it. It took me about 4 goes, but finally I had something that fit. Also, that's when it started hailing. That concludes this alternative plot. Anyway, here is the finished piece with the RGO logo on it. I think it looks pretty nifty. Let's glue it into place. We also swapped the reset button between cases at this point. The one that was found in the lot was actually in better condition. Alright, let's turn our attention back to that long screw post that's tilted in the wrong direction. To repair that, I'm going to use another Sellies product. This is called Need It, which is a polymer repair compound. And yes, I just read that directly off the packaging. Basically, it's kind of like wood filler, except it works for plastic. This comes in 2 parts. And once those are combined, you get a blob that's kind of like blue tack that can be stuck to things. This can be used to repair holes, but ultimately it can also be sanded, so it appears to be a very versatile product. My plan is to screw the post into position since the tilt has a little bit of play, and while it's fixed in the place it should be, I'm going to reinforce it with the Need It. Luckily, the post is next to a gaping hole where the AV cable usually plugs in, so that means I can screw everything into position and then wrangle the Need It in. I had to be quick about it though. This stuff starts to harden within about 2 minutes. I gave the Need It a full 24 hours to set. It doesn't actually need that long, but I wanted to be sure. And as you can see, removing the screw, it's more or less set into position. It did move a little bit, but it's more or less where it needs to be, aligned with the screw hole. It is far from pretty, but it's solid. So everything is now repaired. Time for a test fit. I'm gonna go wash everything else now, but I'm not gonna bother filming it because honestly, who wants to watch me wash bits of plastic in my bathroom sink? Okay, everything has now been washed. Let's reassemble everything for the final time. Oh, no, the pop didn't work. During reassembly, I ran into a bit of a problem. That screw post for the cartridge slot basically imploded as I was screwing the screw in. Ugh, that's frustrating. I unscrewed and rescrewed that screw post maybe 5 or 6 times, but of course it had to break during the final reassembly. Typical. So I guess it was now time to remove the remains, file down the area, design and print a new piece, and glue it back in. And that also snapped off. Guess I probably should have been filming this time around. This is because of a very similar issue as that long screw post. The plastic I'm gluing to is hardly flat. In fact, it curves all over the place. This was tilted in slightly the wrong direction, and when I tried to screw that bracket in, the forces went against the way it was tilting and snapped it clean off. So I employed a similar tactic. I screwed it all into place like how it should be, and then glued it, letting it set in place. This way, it should be tilting in the right direction. And much the same as before, I added some Need It to reinforce it. And with that, I could finally put everything back together. After this long process of cleaning and 3D printing, this was very satisfying. And there we have it. Done. So while functional and clean, this case is far from respectable. There is still a scar from where that massive chunk was glued back in, as well as bits and pieces of plastic missing around the outer case. I have big plans for this N64. I would like to use something like Need It to fill in those gaps and sand everything down, hopefully bringing it back to its original shape, and then maybe I'll spray paint it, and maybe then I'll backlight the bezel, and also maybe I'll region unlock it, and maybe then I'll do a mod so I can have RGB video. So many possibilities. A blank canvas if you were. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.